Greetings and welcome to Safe Space Talks My Mastery. I have John Stein on the line with me. John has an interesting story to share with us today. Here at My Mastery, we just want to encourage people who sometimes go through a struggle in life and feel like, it's the end all. I tell my story about the fire and how I thought I was going to be like this the rest of my life, needing people to take me to the bathroom and all kinds of carrying on. And when it happens to you when you're an adult and achieve things in life, it's not like you was born that way. So it's very challenging. But what we want to share with you on today is how John went through something very traumatic, um, nearly lost his life, and look how handsome he is and looking good and looking healthy. And we like, yes, John. Okay. So John, just, begin to talk to the people about what it was and how you started to process what was going on with you.
Well, okay. I've been healthy all my life. I had been healthy all my life. I'd had a couple minor bouts of illness, but nothing serious. And, a few years back, actually, it was 2021. I said, well, yeah, in the spring, I started having some issues with my eyes. And uh, I didn't know what was going on. My eyes were weird. I had had a cataract surgery the year before, and I had cataracts in both of my eyes, but one of them was worse than the other one, and I had that one fixed, and it did
Okay.
it like miraculous. Like my eyesight became 100% better afterwards. So when in the spring of 2021, I believe it was, I started to experience weird stuff with my eyes. So I thought maybe the other cataract needed doing, and
Right, right.
I went to the doctor, and the doctor didn't think that was any worse than it had been. And she sent me to have my eyes scanned and my retinal specialist, and nobody could find anything particularly wrong with me. And so I decided to go ahead and have the second cataract surgery done anyway.
Let me
And
ask you. So when you went to have a second cataract surgery, was there actually cataract or?
there was a cataract,
Oh,
it's
okay,
just that
okay.
it wasn't particularly worse than it had been before when we hadn't decided to do it.
Right,
But I just thought maybe that will help
right.
me. So I went ahead and did it, and it didn't help. My eyes didn't improve. So I kept. Uh, I went back, and finally I saw a different doctor, forgetting the names of the
Yeah, it's
various
okay.
medical specialties, and that was the first person who noticed that my eyes weren't tracking together. Like,
Mhm.
you look at something and both of
Right.
your eyes should follow it together. And that person noticed that my eyes weren't tracking together. And it turns out that I was having problems from an autoimmune disease called myasthenia gravis.
Okay.
Myasthenia gravis. And because I'd been healthy, I didn't know anything about autoimmune
Right,
disease.
right,
I'd heard of this disease before. And I still know nothing, almost nothing about other ones,
right.
because I haven't had to learn about them, and I hope I
Right,
never
right.
have
Yeah, we
to.
learn what we need to know when we need to know it. You don't
Exactly.
know what you don't know.
Yeah, and you don't need to know what you don't need to know. Anyway, so but the problem was this had been going on for months before they started to finally realize it, and by the time that they realized it, I had what is called a myasthenia gravis crisis.
Okay.
And so my eyes were getting worse. What the other thing that was happening is not only were my eyes not tracking, but one of my eyelids was nearly closed and the other one was open like a cyclops.
Right,
And
right,
I was basically only seeing out of one eye, and I couldn't focus both of my eyes on the same spot. And
right.
anyway, I mean, I was getting ready. I was getting ready to record a CD, and I went to my final rehearsal for the CD with my musicians.
Hmm.
And literally, I had to drive on the highway, and this eye was covering this eye, and this eye was just like this.
Right.
I was
And
covered in
I
eye.
always say is we can laugh now, but it wasn't funny when it was happening.
Well, no, it wasn't funny, but I
Yeah,
was so obsessed by getting to my rehearsal because I was so, I needed to get my music ready for this recording. I
right.
went there anyway, even though I knew it was dangerous driving the car like that. But I mean, I
Wow.
was stupid enough to do it. I fortunately managed to get to the rehearsal and back.
Right.
But then, I could just tell it was getting worse. It was getting worse. And not only that, the weekend before, we had a cookout and I'd cooked hamburgers and something felt weird when I ate the hamburger. It felt like it just slid down my throat.
Wow.
I noticed it, and it was in the back of my mind, and this eye was popped open, and this eye was. Anyway, finally, on Friday of that week, the rehearsal was on Tuesday. On Friday of that week, I woke up, and normally at that time in my life, the only medicine I took a multivitamin, which was like this big. It's like a horse pill or something.
Hmm.
And I went to swallow this pill, and I just realized, no, I cannot swallow this big pill. So I finally called my doctor, and I called the doctor's office, and the doctor wasn't available, but a nurse got on the line. And the nurse fortunately had a neurological background. So I told her
Okay.
what was happening, and here's what she said to me. She said, "Okay, John, do you want me to call the ambulance or can you get to the hospital immediately by yourself? Somebody to drive you?" And I said, "Well, my wife is here. She can drive me to the hospital." So I didn't have to go in an ambulance. But
Right.
literally, I went to the emergency room and I live without traffic. And there's a lot of traffic in Boston. So
Right.
sometimes it takes a lot longer. But I live about 7 minutes from some of the best hospitals in the world. They're the
Thank
Harvard
God.
teaching hospitals. There's the Beth Israel Hospital and there's Brigham and Women's, both of which are like next to each other, about 7 minutes from my house. And she told me to go to Beth Israel because my health care is through a organization that has some kind of affiliation with Beth Israel, and they could see each other's medical records. So I went to the emergency room at Beth Israel Hospital, and they did a bunch of tests on me, and they were basically confirming this diagnosis of this disease that I had never heard before. And hospitals are really crowded, and it took me quite a minute. I think it was midnight before I got a room. Uh,
Wow. Wow.
yeah, I was in the emergency room, and I had a little cubby in the emergency room, but they realized they were going to admit me to the hospital, and it took all day and into basically midnight before the bed opened up. And a bed opened up on a floor that wasn't the neurology floor. It was the 10th floor, and the neurology floor was the 11th floor. But
Right.
spent the night in that room, and then the next day a bed opened up on the floor they wanted to put me, which was the neurology floor. Autoimmune diseases have to do with neurology, nerves. And
Okay.
just to describe the disease that I have, it's called myasthenia gravis,
Hmm.
and a disease that corrupts in some way the connection between your nerves and your muscles.
Okay.
So that if your brain tells your muscles to do this or X or Y, and the impulses come from your brain through your nerves to your muscles, and then the muscles fire. But this
Okay.
particular disease corrupts that connection, so that and it's different for different people, different muscle groups. If everybody's affected a different way,
Right.
so muscle groups, and but those muscles don't fire, and
Right.
so it's very typical to have problems with eyes. That is a typical thing for myasthenia.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Uh,
people, it's their lower legs, and some people it's their upper body. Anyway, my eyes were one thing, and it took a long time for my eyes to recover from that. But
right.
the other thing was my throat muscles were the worst. My throat muscles were closing. That thing where I tried to swallow the hamburger and realized it felt me. That's because my throat muscles weren't working right.
Wow. Wow.
And the bottom line was I was in the hospital for about a week, and every day I was getting worse. Like when I first got in the hospital, they allowed me to order food, and you call down and order from a menu. And
Right.
they allowed me to order anything soft
Mm-hmm.
that would be easy to swallow. But that only I was only able to do that for one day, and by
Wow.
then my throat muscles were closing so much that I couldn't even swallow soft things. So they had to put first they put a tube down my nose into my stomachs, and then they
Yeah.
fed me through this tube in my nose. That was actually the worst physical
Let me
experience that I.
tell you something. I had a feeding tube. When I tell you, it is the worst experience. It's very painful, and it's something you
Did you
don't
have
ever
the
want.
actual tube in
Yeah,
your
yeah,
stomach? Yeah,
yeah. You
yeah.
don't ever
The
want
first,
to experience that. And what is it called? Heparin shots that feel like fire
yeah,
going in your bloodline, and someone dealing with a
the
fire
daily.
and then
Those are
feeling a
the daily
heparin
shots.
shot. It was almost devastating.
Yeah. Well, the first thing they did to me was they weren't sure they were going to need a permanent tube in my stomach, which I did get eventually. But the first thing they did was put one through my
I
nose
know,
because
I
they
know.
have to drill a hole in you to do that. But that was actually the worst because the hospital I was in, it was a wonderful hospital. I got great care. I'm going to
Hmm.
talk about that. But it's a teaching hospital, so every day the doctors would do rounds, and it would be one doctor with some residents, and so I mean there were some real beginners too, and for some reason they wanted to give the least experienced person on their team that day the opportunity to learn how to put this thing in my nose and down into my stomach. And she didn't know what she was doing,
Um,
and she was squeamish, and that was the most physically horrible experience I
yeah,
had. Finally, she couldn't do it, and finally they had to go get somebody experienced. But
here's the time.
the
Yeah.
whole anyway, I had the thing in my nose for a while, and eventually I was advised to get the real feeding tube, which was a little painful, but I mean nothing compared to the
Right.
nose experience. But
Yeah.
anyway, I was in, and then I went into the ICU because, the feeding was one issue, but also breathing started to become a problem with my throat. And I kept getting worse. Every day I was in the hospital for the first week, I got worse and worse. So finally they said to me, "We want you to go from this floor down to the step down unit, which is just outside the ICU."
Right.
And so I did that. And then they said, "Now we think you have to go into the ICU." And this whole team of doctors. And I'm telling you, I really was getting, at that point, I felt like I was going deeper and deeper into a hole. And
Wow.
I wasn't even sure I wanted to live at that point because it was
Wow.
starting to become such a horrible. And then the prospect of going into the ICU, which is the place for the most critical people
Right.
in the.
Yeah. Yeah. Been there. Yeah. Yeah.
I know.
Yeah.
You know
Been there,
exactly.
done that. Right.
You
And
know
and
exactly what.
yeah. Yeah. And
Any.
I want you to explain. I love your transparency when you said that you don't even feel like you can make it anymore. Um, but let's talk about coming out of that process, and then when you're home, right? And you're
Yeah.
realizing what has
Okay.
just happened to you.
Okay.
And
I'll speed up my story because I could tell I was getting to that, but
okay, 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 okay,
no,
okay, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
no. I don't know how much time we have, so I can
Go
make
ahead.
it.
We have some time. We got
Okay.
about 40 minutes.
Anyway, I went into the ICU. They convinced me, fortunately, and I went in there, and they're setting me up. I'm on the table. This is like they're just setting me up. I just
Mhm.
arrived. Do stuff. They give you
Yeah.
IV and all this other stuff. And the next thing I knew, I was gone.
Wow.
I fainted. I don't know what it
Right,
was, and I
right, right.
woke up. I woke up several days later with a tube in my throat. And if I hadn't been sitting in that room, and when I stopped being able to breathe, and they put the tube down my throat, I could have died. If I'd been somewhere and
Right,
not in the hospital, even if I was in the hospital and not in the ICU, it might have been more touch and
right,
go.
right.
So anyway, I woke up, and I'm telling you, I was completely gone. They drugged you up to do it. And I was also fortunate because, with COVID, there are a lot of
Oh,
people on
wow. Yeah.
tubes, and that era. had fortunately passed. If this had happened to me a little earlier, and all those other people, there may not even have been a tube for me because the
Right.
hospital was
Was
overcrowded.
crowded, overcrowded. Yeah.
Anyway, I was lucky. I woke up several days later, and then I'll just say I was in the ICU for 3 weeks.
Okay.
So that's the first month I was in the hospital. It's the first week getting sick, getting to the ICU, and then 3 weeks in the ICU. And I was able eventually to get rid of the tube. And that's a touch and go thing as well,
Mhm.
because when they take the tube out, most people, many people, I don't know about most or many, I don't know what the
Right. Right.
percentage, but they can't breathe on their own, even when they wait the last possible minute where they think you might have a chance to breathe on your own.
Right.
But really touch and go. And they're getting ready to put this tube in your neck here so that you can breathe on, if you can. And I don't know if you knew people who've had that happen to them. And if I had known that, I'm not sure I would have had the courage when I did to have them take the tube out. I was really thought I was ready to get rid of the tube
Yeah.
after I had, but knowing that many people have to have that tube put in. And when I went to rehab after I got out of the hospital, there were a number of people with those, and you can't even talk when you got one of those things in
Yeah.
your neck.
Yeah. No, I know.
Anyway, I was fortunate because it was touch and go, but I was able to breathe on my own,
Yeah.
fortunately.
Yeah.
And then I spent another month in the hospital. Well, never another several weeks in the hospital getting my strength back.
Right.
Anyway, while I was there, then after I was out of the ICU, oh, maybe it happened. I can't remember when this happened, but they actually gave me a real feeding tube in my stomach,
Yeah.
and you know, I don't know. You know what it's like.
Yeah. 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 But
Anyway,
the coming home part. You know,
yeah.
what
Okay,
was
so I
that
went to I
experience?
went to rehab for a couple of weeks. I got my strength back enough. They released me to come home. It was very traumatic for my wife because now she had to assume my care, and
Absolutely.
she was really worried about being able to do it.
Hmm.
And I was so weak. I was my normal weight at that time era of my life was about 180 pounds.
Hmm.
I lost 40 pounds. I was 137 pounds when I came
Wow.
out
Wow.
of the hospital and weighed myself on my scale at home, which
Mm.
means I had lost more than 40 pounds of muscle. It was all muscle
Muscle.
mass.
Right. Right.
And I looked like a skeleton. I
Yeah.
mean, I want to go into the funny details of what happened to my skin that was just hanging like a
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
a skin.
Yeah.
But I looked like a Holocaust survivor,
Mm.
because and the food that you get from the stuff that you put in the feeding tube
Yeah.
it's all
Yeah.
liquid food,
It's
but it doesn't really, it keeps you alive, but it doesn't, you can't put the weight back on.
right.
And I kept the feeding tube. I needed the feeding tube for another 6 months. And when I
Wow.
came home in December, it was finally June, I think, when my doctor said to me, "We got to get you off this feeding tube because you got to put some weight back on and get your
Right.
strength back."
Right.
So anyway, I got home. Uh, I'll say one more thing before I got home is that I told you that I wasn't sure I even wanted to live at some point,
Right. Right.
but it was very important for me because I first of all, you know what this is like. You're in the hospital, you're lying in a bed, they don't let you get up. You can't, I didn't have the strength to get up for a long time, but even then, they don't let you up. And
Right.
really, you can't do anything for yourself. Everything you take for granted in your daily life. Oh, I need a glass of water. You go over and get a glass of water. Well, you can't do anything for
Right.
yourself. So you have to wait for somebody. There's a call button for the nurse, but you're one of, even when you're in the ICU and there's only a few nurses, there's more nurses per patient than there are on the regular
Right.
floor, but every nurse has more than one patient and other stuff they're doing for other people, and they don't just come instantly and give you your glass of water when you need it. So
Right. Right.
number one, I learned why they call people in the hospital who are sick patients,
Because you
because you
gotta
have
have
to be
patience.
patient. So that was one thing, and fortunately for me, although there were times I got frustrated by it, I was able to stay patient.
Right.
But the other thing is, it just gives you a lot of time to think. And I looked at my life and I really tried to think about what's important for me in my life. And it reordered my priorities. You know, I'm
That's
a
it.
musician and I'm obsessed by my music. I've always been that way. And I have a family. I love my family. I've been a good husband. I've been a good father. But if you really had to balance what am I thinking about on a daily basis, my
Mm-hmm.
family here and my music is here.
Right. Right.
And
Right.
I realized that, you know, it's not, it should be at least like balanced, you know,
Mm-hmm.
if not. And my real priority is the people in my life, even
Right.
though what I think about all the time is my music. But
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it was important to go through that process for me.
Yeah. I tell people when you have to go through such a traumatic experience, it does make you grateful. You do know how to prioritize correctly. You know, things that you thought were so important or less important, or what you thought had so much value doesn't anymore. And you begin to examine yourself. For me, it's like, I'm going to take better care of me and not worry so much about frivolous things that, now if so petty. It's like, why was I even stressed out over that? That wasn't even nothing for me to be stressed out over. But your mental state when you got home was what?
I was patient because I'm telling you, I kind of had a very firm belief that I was going to recover.
Okay,
You know,
okay.
this is a disease that, in theory, you do not recover from. If you have this
Wow.
disease, you always have it. But I have had no symptoms from this disease now, ever since,
Amen. Yeah.
ever since. And I had a lot of physical problems due to the drugs I was on, side
Right,
effect drugs that
right.
I weaned myself off of. But those are really those kind of minor side effects from the various drugs and other minor things that have nothing to do with the disease. Those are just like nagging little things, but they're very tiny in comparison to what I
Symptom.
went through.
Yeah, yeah.
And anyway, but and the first day, you know, when I was in the hospital, I woke up in the first morning and the doctors came to me and they told me the diagnosis because up until then I hadn't even heard the words myasthenia gravis, but well, maybe in the emergency room, I
Right,
don't know.
right, right.
But they confirmed the diagnosis and the doctor said to me at that moment, he said, "We don't know what causes this. We have no
Okay.
idea, but we do know how to treat it, and you're going to be all right." So even though it kept getting worse and worse, and I lost courage a few times heading into the ICU, once I got there and it stabilized, I could see that I was going to come back. And I had
Okay.
that in my back pocket the whole time. So,
Okay.
you know, I got home from the hospital and, you know, there's the whole thing with the feeding tube because mine leaked. I don't know if yours
Yeah,
did.
no.
Mine leaked, and every day we had to change the bandages on it. My wife had to do it, and it had to be sanitized, and all this. I mean, you know, it was a lot to deal with, and I
Yeah.
was so weak I couldn't walk really. You know, I was given some physical therapy, and my physical therapy was walking in a circle around my living room,
Right, right. Yeah.
initially.
Yeah, because I remember having to get my equilibrium correct too. And it was feeling like I was going to, every time I would walk or I stood up, I felt like I was going to fall over. And,
Yeah.
that's like a panic. It's like, hold me. And they're like, you're standing okay. And I'm like, I'm going to fall, you know.
Well, you had to get
But
your courage that you could do it, man.
yeah, yeah. And that's really a process. Now, out of all the things that you went through, did you have any affects like I struggled with PTSD? Did you have any of that, or did you seek therapy or any aftercare
No,
adjacent to what you had went through?
no, because I knew I was going to get better, and I've
Okay,
gotten better. Now, you know, I don't know how I would feel if any of the symptoms returned, although I'm not that worried about it because
okay,
even if they did, because I would
The
recognize.
symptoms this
I
time.
mean, I'd been having those symptoms with my eyes for almost 6 months before I had the crisis. And if
Okay.
anybody had known what was going on, I could have avoided the crisis
Right,
because they
right.
have medications for it. Now,
Okay.
I don't want to go back on medications. I got so sick of medications and I had so many side effects from they put me on a medicine called prednisone, which is a steroid,
Okay.
because it minimized the issue with the muscles and the nerves.
Okay.
But it has, and it's a wonderful medicine. It does miracles for people for a variety of issues, but it has tons of side effects that are really bad.
Okay.
And I had all these side effects from that. And you can't, there's something about, once you're on that medication for a certain period of time, you can't just stop because it shuts down some of the hormones that your body produces. And you have to wean off it really slowly so that your body will start producing the hormones again. I'm actually forgetting the details of
Right.
what it actually does, but I know that's the gist of it.
Yeah.
Anyway, I didn't have what you experienced with the PTSD, but my wife is a therapist who works with trauma.
Oh, okay.
I
Well, I need
know.
her on the show next. Okay. Yeah. So
Okay.
you had a security blanket right next to you if you
Well,
did go into a crisis. I'm
my
sure.
wife is very wise, so that's very helpful. But for me, it was a lot of time. It took me over a year to get my strength back. It
Okay.
was very slow. I mean, at my age, I'm in my 70s. At my age, you do not bounce back from anything the way you do. I
Right.
mean, I
Right.
don't know how many times I crashed and burned and skinned my legs as a kid. And if I
Yeah.
did that, it'd take me 2 months for the skin to heal.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah, 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 yeah. I
So,
think about some of the wild things. I used to be in a roller skating club and a skateboard club, and we used to do these dangerous things with going down this steep hill to see if we could catch a light on a busy street. And
yeah.
I look at that hill, sometimes I drive by and I say to myself, what the heck? We could have got hit by a bus, a truck, a car, and just free will, like just like it couldn't happen. And now I wish I would, get on some skates. And I love skating. And I'm just always like, but this time if I fall, it just might not go that well. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? You got the hip injuries, the knees injuries, the back injuries. But I like your testimony and I like your resilience. And this is such a good conversation because not everybody who goes through a traumatic experience, and I love this, will deal with significant trauma. And so and that I love this because there are people who have gone through some crisis like yours and come out victorious. So cool. So kudos to you and sharing your story with us and letting people know that it's okay. But I love your confidence that you trusted that you will be better. Now, was that just the words of the doctor? Was that just who your
Oh,
makeup? Is that part of your faith? Um, tell us, share,
uh,
tell us what was going on with you.
I don't know. I just how well, the doctor told me that I was going to be okay. That
Hmm.
they knew how to deal with it. They had medicines and blah blah blah. So
And
that
you,
was good to hear. And that was the first day I was in the hospital before I even got really really sick.
right,
But I don't know. I just had this sense that things were getting better, but it took a long time.
right,
I want to say one thing that might help people in your audience. Uh, I was very fortunate because this hospital I went to, I got incredible care. And I do know that many people who suffer from this disease don't get the same kind of care I got.
yeah,
And, you know, if you don't get the care, you could have a really hard time recovering. I mean,
yeah,
I had a hard time recovering, but I had the care. I mean, we're not getting into the details of all the various
right,
interventions they were able to do specifically for this disease. But the hospital is, like my brother lives in the Midwest. I grew up in Kansas City, and my brother talked to a friend of his who's a doctor who's out there, and the doctor said to him, Rick, your brother is in the place where all the stuff happens that everybody else in the world learns what to do. You know,
Wow.
so I was very fortunate that way. And
Right.
not everybody's going to get to go to this hospital, but I just
Right.
want to say to your audience, if you're suffering from this disease, find the care, find the people who are expert in this. I mean, the people that were helping me, that's their specialty.
Right.
There's the person who was in charge of my care at the specific hospital. What does she do? She deals with people with these kind of neurological. This is what she does. This is her whole career. So, find people with expertise, even if you're living somewhere where that isn't easily available. Because, I mean, for example, I have a friend a friend of a friend who lives in California who has the same disease and was really suffering. So she put me in contact with this person, and I was astonished because she's in a place where you'd think there would be good medical care. She lives in Stanford, California. Hello, Stanford medical stuff has to be
Right.
equal of what we have here with Harvard, you
Right.
know. I mean, these are creme de la creme kind of institutions.
Yeah.
And there she is, and she's not getting any good advice. She doesn't know what her options are. I didn't understand it. But, people in your audience should know that there is care for this disease, and
Right.
doctors
And don't
know what they're
settle for
doing.
just one, get a second opinion as well.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really push, and you have to. I mean, maybe you have to push. I was lucky; it just fell in my lap, or I fell into its lap, and
Right.
I live 7 minutes away. But uh, it's really important. And then there are a lot of forums which my wife looks at. I don't have the patience for it, but
Right.
there are a lot of people, and a lot of people have this disease and it's recurring, and they go through periods where they can't do anything. They get so tired they can barely get out of bed. They have to rest. And
Right.
uh,
Right.
I don't know. First of all, I'm very grateful. I don't know what it is about me that allowed me to step away from it almost entirely, maybe entirely. Maybe it'll be entirely for the rest of my life. I hope so.
Right.
But in any
Right.
case, make sure you get care and it's available for the disease.
All right. Well, I appreciate that and appreciate you sharing and giving us your testimony and how to be resilient, how to have an encouraging heart, that you will make it. And that's just, like I said, either your makeup, if, your faith, your trust in the doctor, however, you just want to come out well. And so I thank you so much, John, for just sharing with us. And, the symptoms begin with your eyes. And I want to talk about, because he is a musician as well. Can you share with us before we go the story when you were really trying to use your fingers? He's a guitarist, to play the guitar, and how you didn't have enough strength and what it felt like to finally go back to playing your guitar.
Well, I came home from the hospital. I'd been there
Mhm.
2 months. I'd lost all this weight. I had no muscles left. And also, dexterity with my fingers. Not only did I have no strength, but I hadn't used my hands in 2 months.
I
They were
know
really.
that story too.
My wife went and got my two beautiful guitars and brought them down and put one of them on my lap. And first of all, I could barely hold it on
Yeah.
my lap.
Wow.
And then I put my hand on the neck of the guitar and tried to press down the strings, and the fingers barely worked. And I didn't have the strength in my fingers at that point to push the strings down. Or if I did push it down, this is very interesting. It hurt me.
Right.
When I started, you and I talked a little earlier. When I was 7 years old, I started playing the guitar. And I do remember this. It's like it was subliminal, but it's come back to me because of this experience. I remember when I was a little kid learning to play my first chord on a guitar. And I was told where to put my fingers on the neck of the guitar to
Right.
play this E chord.
Right.
And I and press down on each string, and your fingers can't block the other strings because
Right,
other
right.
strings don't, resonate. And it hurt, and then your fingers would get these lines from the strings in them because your fingers are soft, you
Mm-hmm.
know. And I took it for granted because I played the guitar since I was 7. I have all
Right,
these calluses on my fingers. My fingers barely have the lines on them. They have these calluses instead.
right.
But I remembered when I tried to press down the strings, I could barely do it and it hurt like crazy. And I had all these lines like I was 7 years old again. And I
Wow.
looked at my hands and I went, oh my God. Because, when I was in the hospital, I wasn't sure I'd be able to play again.
Right.
I really didn't know if I was my actually I made peace with that, by the way.
Okay.
That was part of my getting my priorities straight.
Come on
Like
now. Mm-hmm.
I didn't know if I would ever be able to play the guitar again. And I thought to myself, well, I spent my life doing music. I have a body of work I'm proud of.
Right.
And if I never do anything more, so be it. My priority is the people in my life. And I made peace with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I wanted to play again. I hoped I would be able to play. I got the guitar on my lap and I finally got out of the hospital and I couldn't. But you know what? I knew it would come back
Right.
if I worked at it. So every day I tried a little bit, and over time it slowly got a little bit better. And
Mm-hmm.
I'll tell you, this will be maybe the last story. I told you this earlier.
Yeah.
I the bass player that I been playing with the last few years. He was really kind. His name is Ed Lucy. He's on my new recording.
Yeah.
Anyway, but he would come over to my house to visit me just to buck my spirits up. And he would
Thank
come in
you,
overnight.
Ed. We need people like Ed in our lives.
Ed's a beautiful man. He
Yeah.
really is. Anyway, he was coming just to be kind to me, and he didn't bring his bass with him, but he came over a number of times. And finally, I'd been working at slowly playing a little bit. And I said to him, maybe we should try to play.
Right.
I have not only my guitars, I had a bass guitar here, and he played that. It was one of the biggest thrills of my life to play music again with
Right.
somebody. My fingers didn't work that well.
Right. Right.
Stuff I tried to do, and it didn't come out as well as I was hearing it in my head. But I knew. But it was such a thrill to even with my bad technique to be able to play again, and it was just a blessing.
Yeah.
So I'm a very grateful person. That's all I can tell you. But
Yeah.
really, if you have an illness like that, get the care. It's available. That's my message.
All right. Thank you so much, John. I appreciate you.
Nigeria, I appreciate you too. Totally. You're beautiful.
Thank you.